Welcome back. In lecture 27, we will cover residential mobility and location choice. This lecture will be divided into two parts. The different concepts that we will cover is background, residential location choice theory, residential mobility, and intent to move model. So, when we talk about the residential location choice process, we first have to understand that residential land use caters to two-thirds of the total urban land area. That means it's the most primary land use that we have to deal with in when we are planning for an urban area. And majority of trips in an urban area are also home-based trips. That also means that the total number of trips that are generated are from residential areas, and we have to, when we are talking about travel demand management for a particular urban area, then we have to manage, these are the trips which create the most effect, or rather these are the trips which we have to manage primarily during peak hours when people travel from their office to, from the home to office. So, in addition to that, the residential choice process actually talks about how a individual decides to locate himself in the urban area. For example, where he wishes to buy a plot, or where he wishes to buy his house, or where he wishes to rent, or where he wishes to move from whenever he is coming from another area, or from the same city but from a different neighborhood. And there are several reasons for that. And this process is a long-term choice process. The reason being, people don't change their homes very often. So, it's a long-term choice process. So, we have discussed about short-term choices, long-term choices in the context of urban land use transportation planning. So, this is a long-term choice process. Then it has got a lot of behavioral linkages between in between mobility and activity patterns and the household's location choice. So, that means the place where a household choose to locate itself has lot of connection with the mobility patterns arising for this particular city, and also the activity patterns that a individual undertakes in this whoever is from that particular area. Now, number of workers in a household also has a major effect on household's location choice. For example, both the husband and the wife works. So, in that case, the choice of the residence probably will consider both of their work locations. So, number of workers in a household do play a major role. And whereas in we can also say that residential location choice also impacts their employment. That means for certain kinds of employment, people do their location choice actually determines their location of employment. It also plays a role in the economic development, because the way people choose a house or decides to buy a house, that actually has a big role to play in the economic development process. And then social structure, it plays a role in the social structure, the spatial segregation, and also urban structure and the transport system for an area. So, residential location choice is a big component of the urban land use transportation process. So, the decision to choose a particular area, or to decision to actually change the area, is also interdependent with many other decisions. For example, it is very connected with the decision to choose a work location, or decision to go to work somewhere. So, it is connected with work location choice. It is also connected with the tenure status. Tenure status, depending on the tenure status, people sometimes choose their location, and also it depends on car ownership to some extent. For example, if you have a car, you are not concerned about bus routes or your transit routes. In that case, you can choose to locate in an area where there are not too many, you know, it's a little bit away from the central city area or the core city area, or it's away from the transit network. So, these are the decisions. It's in Indian context, it could be a car, it could be a two-wheeler. So, people's choice is to reside in a particular area or locate in an area also depends on his ownership choice for a particular vehicle choice. That means whatever vehicle he owns has an impact on that particular choice. So, when we talk about residential location choice theory, we can say that residential location choice can be defined as the choice of a place where a household presently lives. That means what are the reasons why he have chose to live in that current area. So, that could be from where we can determine the reasons for that particular choice. And also we can determine when households get dissatisfied with its current location, when and where the household decides to move. So either the residential choice process could be looked at from the perspective of a person who has already moved into a certain area, and then we analyze the patterns why he has moved there and so on, or it could be or we could also investigate the current situation or the current population, and we can ask them that where they want to move, why they want to move, and then when they want to move. All this also we can, from that also we can determine what kind of residential location choice for a particular urban area. So the process of residential location choice involves many decisions such as when to move, where to move, and choice of tenure, and some other variables like is it what kind of building it is, and so on. So when to move is important, then because it determines if they are willing to move within the planning period that we are talking about. It could be a 1-year period, or it could be people may decide to move now, but actually they will move after a couple of years. So because it is not like an immediate decision, it takes certain time to get executed eventually. So where to move is another big location, because people evaluate between different locations and then ultimately choose a location, and it depends on many characteristics that we will discuss. And choice of tenure and others also we have talked about, like people going for rental housing, or for a certain period you will get the housing. All these things do play a role. So it is important to understand the process of location choice, and it is also depends on many other constraints, like it depends on the household's budget, it depends on the commuting time to work, it depends on the schools, and so on. So that means if I have a kid in my family and his or her school is at a particular location, I will obviously try to make sure my kid doesn't have to travel too much to go to school. So that plays a big role in the decision process. So it's not the commuting time to work for a family, for maybe for the husband or wife, it's also the time to go to school as well. So the residential process is generally split into two main components. We can divide this entire residential choice process in two parts. One is the decision to move, that is whether a household decides to become an active member in the housing market. That means this is a candidate to family is a candidate to choose a particular new dwelling. And the second part is the residential location choice. Given the intent to move, that means once he decides to move, it's not only he wishes to move, he absolutely makes sure he wants to move, then which is the location that he chooses. So these are the two components of the decision part. So when we talk about residential location choice, we can talk about both revealed preferences as well as stated preferences. For example, I already discussed that when we try to find, we analyze the existing choices of household, and we try to determine that, okay, what were the reasons why a household choose this particular location, then we are talking about actual or revealed preferences. And when we are talking about hypothetical choices, like we give people option, or we just ask them where you want to move, we take their choices and we ask them the reasons, then it's a hypothetical scenario, and that is stated preference. And as you can understand, stated preference, until unless they are executed, we cannot say that they will be executed. So that is where revealed preferences are always stronger than stated preferences. But the issue is revealed preferences doesn't give us too much variety. So that is where stated preference are sometimes better than even where a revealed preference analysis. So the residential, in addition to that, there is the issue of residential self-selection process. What it means is, based on a household will select a location based on their travel attitude. For example, a household is going to choose transit, so it has already decided on that, and so it will always try to look for a location which is near a transit corridor or near a transit station. So that's a fixed choice. That means his transit choice is fixed. Based on that, the household is selecting a particular location. So that means it is already the selection process is somewhat biased. So this is called the residential self-selection process. So we should take care of, whenever we are trying to decide the reasons for a family to move at a particular location, sometimes the reasons are prefixed. That means sometimes the reason or a location is why the household has chosen a particular location is already fixed. So that means they have already decided on a particular station and the surrounding area. So relationship between changing jobs and houses. So we need to also understand when a person's job changes his job, he sometimes need to change his houses. This is one big relationship that we have to be concerned about. And then most members in a multitasking household take part in the decision making. So that means if we have a family of many persons, that means all of them give their opinion. It's not only the household head gives his opinion, but sometimes the opinion is taken from the entire family. So that is difficult to incorporate in the modeling process. And households often accept an alternative which is not their first choice due to supply constraint and urgency on the part of household. That means I want to move to a dwelling in a particular area and I have a limited budget, but at that point of time I'm not able to get the perfect choice, so I can always settle for the next best choice because there is no supply of the choice that I want. So that actually is another so the actual choice that is or the actual location or the dwelling the household has chosen, if I analyze that, I will not probably get the reason why the person has moved there, or I will not try to identify the individual characteristics what has played a role in the household's choice process. So there are several other factors also influence how households make choices, such as supply of new construction, that means new buildings. That means if there is a lot of supply, the prices come down, then people want to move. And if the supply is less, then the prices go up, people will not want to move. Then loan interest rate, what is the existing market rate of interest, so that actually plays a role. Then taxes and tax relief, sometimes when there are a lot of tax relief in the budget on new houses, buying of new houses, then people buy the new houses. And then also determines households or renting and owning propensity. So these are the things which are determined when these factors change. So there are several reasons which influence the residential location choice process. So we already discussed the certain decisions are joint. For example, decision to move and choice of a residential location. This is a joint decision. That means once I decide to move, then only I will choose a particular location, or based on the choices available to me, I may decide to move. So it's a simultaneously both the decisions are taken. That means if there are no choices available, I will probably not decide to move. Or similarly, if I move, I know that there are some options available. So the entire decision making for movement happens together. So it's a simultaneous choice. Similarly, we can say a choice of work destination and choice of residential location could be a simultaneous choice. For example, my tenure, I am a blue collar worker, I live in a poor neighborhood. My tenure status, I means my rental housing, I have to move from my existing rental housing because the house owner will not allow to stay there. So in that case, I will now choose for a location to move, and I may choose to locate in the same neighborhood, but because if I am willing to walk over there, but if I am flexible, then I may choose a location which involves the potential to get more work. Suppose I work as a household help, or I work in a small shop, so I will choose my location based on the location where I would get more a job or a work, and also so these are two joint decisions which are taken together. So this is how we can also do the modeling process. So there are different approaches to the modeling for residential location choice. Traditional method of evaluating choices is based on the random utility maximization. We have learned the discrete choice theory in the previous lecture, and then when we talk about residential mobility or intention to move, that is when a decision to move or a decision to not move by a particular household, then usually it's a binary choice. That means should I move or not. So we use a binary logic model in this particular case. In case of residential location choice, that means I'm trying to choose a particular location or a place where I'm going to move, then there could be many choices. So if there are two location alternatives, then we can use a binary logic model. But if there are many alternatives, like I can choose an alternative out of many locations, then probably it's a multinomial logic model. So that means there are many choices. Now, binary logic model seems a bit odd, but if you consider that a person will who is new to the city, is a migrant to the city, he wants to stay near his job location, so his options to stay may be very limited. So it could be a option between only two locations, so which is near to his maybe the industry is working, or maybe to his office that he is working. So in that sense, it could be a binary logic model or a multinomial logic model. So this is how we model this choice process. And then it could be a joint model, like I discussed the joint decisions right now. So joint model of residential mobility and location choice, and you can see this nesting structure over here, where this is the first level and this is the second level. So first I decide to either move or stay, and then once I decide to move, then I can have choice 1 and choice 2. These are the two options, or I can even have a choice 3 as well. So in that sense, it's a nested structure. So this particular nest of decisions is within this particular node. So this is a nest and this is a direct decision. So in that way, if I want to now determine the probability of stay, or the probability of choice 1, or probability of choice 3, or probability of choice 2, then I have to go for a nested logic model. So we will cover nested logic model in details when we do the mode choice module. And right now, we can say that in the first level we can use a binary logic model. In the second level we can go for a multinomial logic model. So then we combine these two using a particular methodology which is adopted for nested logic. So there are two seminal, when we talk about residential mobility part. So we have broken the decision of residential location choice into two parts. One is the residential mobility part, that means decision to move or not, and the other is the location choice part. So when we talk about residential mobility, there are two seminal papers, one by Rossi and the other by Brown and Moore. So the Rossi said this paper was on why families move. It was a study in social psychology, and this is the paper where instead of aggregated OD pattern, that means in Lowry's model and all the models we have talked about, how people decide to locate themselves from based on their job location and so on. So there we are talking about a aggregate pattern of origins and destinations. So we are talking about a group of individuals, but this is the first paper which talked about on the individual household. So this is the first thing, and then it linked residential mobility to housing studies. So this was the first paper which linked transportation with housing, or we can say land use to some extent as well. So in the Brown and Moore's paper, there were two stages were being proposed, like people are dissatisfied with their housing. That means people, once they are dissatisfied with their housing, then in the stage 2 they start for a vacant housing and then decide to locate or stay in the present location. So once they are dissatisfied, they will start house search, and then they may say that, well, I will stay back or I will relocate based on there are certain other things, stress threshold plus budget and so many other things that comes into play. So this is what Brown. So these are two papers which actually started this residential location choice modeling. So in residential mobility model, housing supply is considered as an exogenous factor in most residential mobility models, because housing is something it's very difficult to predict, because where new housing will come up and all, it's particularly depends on many things. For example, government interventions are there in sectors like finance, construction, pricing, supply of housing and land use. So that means based on government policies on all these different aspects, there are real estate developers decide on building houses. So it depends on the market equilibrium and the supply demand choice process, so on. So that is why some people take it as an exogenous input into the model. That means we know these are the locations of housing available in an urban area. Now I decide to then we start from there, and then my job is to decide if the family is going to move, provided this kind of supply is there, or where the location choice would be. So This is one way, and the other is it could be also endogenous to the residential mobility models or land use transportation models, where we assume that government has not too much control. That means real estate developers are free to build wherever they want based on supply demand gaps, or based on the land prices, based on many other factors, and there the residential this entire thing could be also endogenous. So, residential mobility also depends on the local housing market, the national context, that is economic and demographic circumstances, housing policies, wealth and tenure. So, these are many bigger macroeconomic decisions also which influence the residential mobility for a particular area. So, residential mobility can be defined as a change of residential location in or out of an area in order to satisfy changing needs of a household. So, that means residential mobility is from an area, and in order, because there are changing needs within a household, that is why people will like to move from one location to another. And long distance mobility is generally termed as migration, whereas mobility within a neighborhood are considered under residential mobility. That means whenever in a land use transportation modeling process, people are moving from different urban areas to this particular urban area, we will consider it as a migration that will actually contribute to the total number of people added to the city. But then choice or movement within the city of people once they are arrived over there, and then it's part of the residential mobility model to predict the movement of people inside a city. So, it's like within urban area, if there is some, we can say that there is migration, then it is basically determined by the residential mobility model. Many researchers also draw a distinction between intention to move and actual mobility. That means whenever we are doing a survey, we are asking people, are you willing to move? And what are the reasons why you are willing to move, what are your household characteristics and so on. So, this is the intention to move. Intention to move is not actual mobility. So, once actual mobility happens, we can ask people that, okay, why have you moved here? What is your family's characteristics and so on. From there, we can also detail out or determine the reasons why a person has moved, what are the individual parameters which influence this movement process and so on. So, sometimes why? Because even though people express they want to move, but sometimes they don't move. Why? Because people are resistant to move. This is first. Second, they are attached to their current house, because you have to change your house and it's a big decision. So, people are attached to their current houses. They may end up saying that, well, let's stay back for another couple of years. So, this is there. Then neighborhood ties. That means when people stay at a neighborhood, they generate ties, they talk, they have friends, they have neighbors. So, they do certain kind of activities in the neighborhood. So, that this actually helps them to it's sort of a pull factor. So, people don't want to shift from there. Then facing physical, economic or social disruption and mutual trust. So, these are other issues, and which because as soon as you move, then there are problems, there are a lot of problems that arise, physical problems, economic problems, social disruptions, and then there are other trust issues also. So, total collectively these are termed as social capital. So, social capital also do have a big role to play in a person's intention to move and actual mobility. So, intention to move refers to people's desires, plans, inclinations or expectations about future mobility. So, whenever we are talking about residential mobility, there are many factors behind the decision to move. One could be life cycle events, like a person changes his job, work, a person can marry, there is change in the household size. For example, there is a kid, there is a child is born in the family and so on. So, this could be the reason which triggers the change, or there could be some event with something related with aspirations and ambitions. That means I am staying in a very poor neighborhood, I have now got a job, I want to move to a good neighborhood. So, desire for better living, desire for owning a car, now I want to buy a car, I may also decide to move as well. Then spatial needs, need for greater space. That means I really have not enough number of rooms, so I require another a couple of rooms, so that's why I want to move. Then travel needs, reduce travel time or cost. That means I got a job which is too far away from my existing housing. I want to reduce the travel time or cost. So that actually requires me to change my housing. And then external events like change on availability of transport service, right? Like suddenly the metro system has come up in the city, so I may feel like I will move to a area which is around a metro station because my office is located near a metro station. So this may be this external events that also may play a role. Households have been also categorized as stayers who stay in the same dwelling. That means sometimes people live in an apartment complex. They will like to stay in the same building itself. They will just change floor because they may be living on rent. Now they are very attached to this particular house. Now their tenure is over. So a they will always choose a dwelling in the new building, or in the same building but on a different floor or a different apartment. There could be movers who cover short distances or moves from a nearby neighborhood, and that means they want to stay in the same neighborhood. And then there are newcomers who are new residents from outside areas. So criteria could be housing situation. Is it voluntary move or forced move? Sometimes that also plays a role in a person's decision to move. That means tenure is over, you have to move. Or it could be a voluntary move that may have an effect on the movement process, and then depends on the mobility patterns of that particular household. So these are the different reasons why a person move. And we can have different kinds of models to determine these things. For example, we can have a willingness to move model or propensity to move model. That means is a person willing to move and what are the reasons for that, and that could be done based on stated preference surveys. Then there could be residential mobility model, which could be revealed based on revealed preference service. That means we go to a neighborhood, ask the people when they have moved there. If they have moved there recently, maybe within the last couple of years, then we ask them that why they have moved there, what is their household characteristics, did they change their job, what is the travel time to job. So all these things may be evaluated eventually to determine what make them to move to this particular location, or just move, why they have moved in the first place. And in most cases we use a binary logic model, and this is the primarily used to determine or model mobility decisions and choices. So household residential mobility is a function of both housing and location attributes whose relative importance varies across different types of household. So there are different methods, of course, but in revealed preference method, which is dependent on actual behavior, we can either go for an aggregate approach or a disaggregate approach. In aggregate approach, we determine how attractiveness for a particular zone or place varies for the movers, like example housing prices and so on, average housing prices for that particular area, and what attributes result in the changing levels of attractiveness. So that means when an area becomes more attractive, people may decide to move. The other could be a disaggregate approach, where households are surveyed to determine the reasons for their location change along with their attitudes and future aspirations. So we can either survey the households and determine why they have changed their location and so on, or we can just go and survey different zones and find out what has changed in that particular zone, how many people have moved there and so on, and from there we can also determine that overall movement pattern in that particular urban area. So one is an aggregate approach and other is a disaggregate approach. So in disaggregate approach, we are dealing with households directly. So for example, stated preference models, this is revealed preference, whereas we will develop stated preference models when it is difficult to, when we want to introduce some new policies. Like for example, we want to develop some new transport facilities. What impact it will have on residential mobility or residential choice to move, and or for example future housing markets. If some new housing comes up in an urban area in a certain area, what effect it will have on intention to move. So this kind of things could be only captured if we do a survey where we give those hypothetical scenarios and then ask people that will they want to move or not. So this is another form of modeling. And this so to explain all this, we use this paper, The Intention to Move and Residential Location Choice Behavior by Kim and Pagliara and Preston, and this is this will show an example of an intent to move model. where intent to move is because of dissatisfaction with existing dwelling and location, disequilibrium resulting from changes of household characteristics like income, marital status, and family size. These are the reasons that were considered in this particular model. And attractiveness of alternative, that means what are the alternatives available and what attractiveness it has got. And then because if choices are there, then only people would be willing to move there, or rather will be willing to move. And favorable institutional factors such as interest rates, rates of returns, and housing investment, we can also include them in the model. So in the current example, we have taken existing housing characteristics such as accessibility factors for that particular area, dwelling and neighborhood characteristics. So it's accessibility of a zone, dwelling and neighborhood characteristics for that particular zone or that particular area that we are talking about. Then we have considered how then household characteristics were considered, and then attractiveness of alternative properties were also considered. So intention to move model is a function of, over here, all these different parameters that were, this is the theoretical construct. That means people are based on this particular parameters, we can evaluate if these parameters are playing a role in the person's decision to move. So these are the parameters, like TTW is travel time to work, which is given in minutes, TCW travel time to work, in cost, this is pound, travel cost to supermarket, this is shopping opportunities, and population density, this is neighborhood characteristics, location of residence, is it a suburban area or it's a city core area, then quality of schools, housing price, if the house that they are trying to move is a detached house or otherwise, or number of bedrooms, age of respondent, then the household characteristics, male or female, household income after taxes, number of children, because taxes do play a role in the decision making process, number of children living together, and so on, and income. So these are the different expected signs. So whenever we are doing a model, we understand, is it going to influence my decision in a positive way or a negative way. So so travel time to work, its expected sign is positive, and then travel cost to work, expected sign is again positive, travel cost to supermarket positive, and so onwards. And number of bedrooms negative. So if my number of bedrooms is actually less, then actually my intention to move will actually be determined from that. So this is the binary logic model estimation. So in the next lecture, we will explain how to develop a binary logic choice model, and but here we will just discuss the results. So we have the constant, this is the beta 0 coefficient of the regression model, then beta, and these are the coefficients given over here. These are the coefficients for house price, travel time to work, travel cost to work, travel cost to shop, and so on. And these are the different positive and negative indicators. So there were total observations in the model were around 3000. The log likelihood, this is a measure which actually helps us to determine that is the overall model is giving us better results than a base model where we have not included all these factors. So that's the log likelihood value. And then this is sort of a R square measured, which is not exactly R square, where we get some measure on the overall fit statistics of this particular model. So what we find from that model is probability of a household's intent to move increases with higher housing cost, higher travel time and cost to work. That means when travel time increases, my intention to move increases. So that's why it's a positive sign. When higher population densities, when population density increases, my propensity to move also increases. Residence in the central city, number of children, when number of children increases, I want to move. Male household head, male household heads are more likely to move. Where decreases with increase of quality of schools, that means if the area has got better quality schools, I will not probably wish to move. Residents in detached housing, that already I am living in a detached housing, people don't want to move. Residents with more number of bedrooms, they will not want to move. So this is the reason we have positive and negative influences. So we need to understand the logical reasons what influences my decision to move, and then check if the findings from my model actually matches the logical reasons. So I will explain in the next lecture what does this marginal, all, you know, what are the coefficients, what are the, how these are determined, and how to interpret these models in detail. But here we can understand these are the different parameters or indicators which actually influence a person's intent to move, and some of them are positively related, some of them are negatively related, and the coefficients determine the factor by which it is positively or negatively related. So these are the references you can study. So we can conclude by saying residential location choice is one of the major components in the land use transportation planning process. It is closely related with mobility choices and also to choices such as work location choice, car ownership, etc. Residential location choice can be further divided into two components such as residential mobility and choice of location. And finally, residential mobility model can be developed based on stated preferences, which can be used to model the intent to move, or based on revealed preferences, which can reveal the reasons for moving. Thank you.